Welcome to the Skeptic Zone, the podcast from Australia for science and reason.
Yes, it's the Skeptic Zone podcast, episode number 704 for the 3rd of April 2022. Richard Saunders coming to you from Sydney, Australia. Did you survive April Fool's Day? Nobody tried to play an April Fool's prank on me, and I didn't prank anybody else. And I think that's the general trend. I remember when I was growing up, April Fool's was a big day. Lots of media coverage, lots of funny things going on. But these days, maybe people discovered that practical jokes sometimes really aren't that funny. I don't know, society changes. But what doesn't change? What doesn't change is the success rate of the Australian Vaccination Risks Network when they take legal action. It doesn't change because it's abysmal. We're going to be covering a story brought to my attention in the last week of yet another court action brought by these people and the outcome. And we speak to noted skeptical campaigner, skeptical activist Ken McLeod. What have those increasingly silly people at the Australian Vaccination Risks Network been up to lately? Why did they end up in court? Find out at the top of the show. After that, it's a sort of a follow-up to a story we had about a month ago when nurses and midwives took to the streets here in Sydney to protest against their conditions and the extra stress and workloads they're facing, and they did it again. In the past week, they went back to the streets to march and protest, and we catch up with some nurses on the street and ask them what their concerns are. And as a podcast that supports science and reason and scientifically based medicine, we certainly support nurses and midwives. After that, it's part 2 of The Call of the Quack in the Book of Tim. Now, this is a report by Tim Harding. Last week, Tim looked at quackery in ancient Greece, and this week he looks at quackery in ancient Rome. And of course, this is from the pages of the Skeptic magazine, the journal from Australian skeptics. Then to round off the show, it's back to the treasure trove of Trove, the digital archives going back centuries here in Australia from Australian newspapers and magazines. And we're going to be looking up things like James Randi and the Australian skeptics and so on. No matter where you are around the world, I hope you're having a good weekend. I don't know, maybe you've gone out to some birthday parties. Everyone has a birthday party once in a while. And of course, it occurs to me that a certain percentage of my listeners, dare I say 1 in 365, or something like that, are having a birthday today. Happy birthday. Or yesterday, so it narrows the odds down a bit. Or did you have a birthday in the last week or the week ahead? It reminds me of an old cold reading routine where the performer, let's call them, would stand on the stage and look at somebody and say, "I'm sensing a birthday around you. Do you know, is there somebody around you who had a birthday last month or maybe this month or possibly next month?" I kid you not, this is one of the routines they use. And think about it, dear listener, think about it. Do you know somebody who had a birthday last month, this month, or is going to have a birthday next month? The chances are you do. I certainly do. I've got a couple of lucky nieces coming up, birthdays coming up very soon. Ooh, I better run out and buy some presents for them. So to all those people having birthdays or have had a lot of fun visiting people, having a nice birthday party, I'm thinking of you. But now it's time for me to run downstairs and look for some birthday cake. Well, there's no birthday cake here. Maybe I'll just have some cake. Chocolate cake. Of course, while I do that, I hope you enjoy the Skeptic Zone. And joining me on the line now is somebody who I have a great deal of respect for. I've known for many years. It's somebody who actually takes action. Now, you've heard that expression, folks, I'm sure. Everybody complains about the weather, but nobody does anything about it. Well, here's a man who does something about it. Not the weather, Maybe not the weather, but many other things. It's Ken McLeod. Hello, Ken.
Good morning, Richard.
Good morning. Now, I seem to remember not too long ago, maybe in the last 5 or 6 years, seeing you pop up talking about another issue, and we'll get to the main issue soon, which is the Australian Vaccination Risks Network and recent goings on in court. But you were talking about chemtrails, condensation trails. You're a man of many talents.
Well, thank you. Yes. I got a call from Channel 10. They had a morning program discussing issues of the day. And the issue then was chemtrails. And they got some guy in from America who's made a fortune publishing books about chemtrails. And so they got me in as the resident skeptic with some experience in aviation and so on to explain the facts and the science behind chemtrails, or as we prefer to call them in the real world, condensation trails.
That's right. So I think it's quite interesting that somebody like yourself has quite a broad range of knowledge. And before we get to the main issue we will talk about soon, when I'm saying that people complain about the weather but nobody does anything about it, people complain about what they see as miscarriages of justice or wonky things or shonky things, especially in the world of alternative medicine. But your policy is to do something about it via official channels. That's channels. Correct. And how does that process work for you?
Well, my background is as a bureaucrat in the aviation industry for the Commonwealth departments. And so I've got some experience with regulatory authorities and so on. Now, it occurred to me that people complain about fraudulent charities or crank health promoters and influencers, but they complain and leave it there. Now, I thought there is a regulator for every aspect of human activity. And in the case of charities, there is a regulator there just waiting for the complaints to come in. And there's regulators there for fraudulent medical advice and so on. And so my technique is to gather all the evidence about this particular recalcitrant. Let's say, for example, the AVN, and I will put in a formal complaint to the regulator, and in New South Wales, it's the Healthcare Complaints Commission, and I leave it to them. Now, Usually, in the case of the federal regulator, the Australian Health Practitioners Regulator Agency, that's usually just an informal warning via a phone call. But occasionally these things do pay off with prosecution. And I'm thinking of Fran Sheffield.
Right, yes, of course, from Homeopathy Plus, who was making very unwise claims about homeopathy and whooping cough.
And malaria vaccines and so on. Now, that wasn't one of my complaints. I can't remember who actually did it, but I'm looking at Professor Ken Harvey to thank for that one. But there have been a few prosecutions. There's been some deregistrations, some surrendering of licenses, that sort of thing, and even changes of legislation in the case of the AVN. So it is an effective technique. It is time-consuming, but let's not forget, of course, that all these regulators are under-resourced and underfunded, and the people there are generally swamped with so much complaints and so on. And so you have to make a good case that this is an issue worth pursuing, and sometimes they do. So, some people complain about the regulators not acting, but maybe it's down to the fact that people haven't put in the formal evidence. I appeal to people to, if you can afford the time to get onto Facebook and complain about something, you can probably put in a formal complaint to the appropriate regulator.
Yeah, but you're right. It is a process. It's not something you can just ring up somebody and say, do something about this. And they say, yes, of course, I'll do it. And then, situation is resolved. Now, let's talk briefly about the AVN. Now, in the early days of the Skeptic Zone, going back over a decade, of course, the Australian Vaccination Network, no matter what they call themselves, they used to be called the Australian Vaccination Skeptics Network, and then they changed their name to the Australian Vaccination Risks Network, which I think they are at the moment, but we just normally refer to them as the AVN.
Yep.
And we used to talk about them a lot because they were very, very upfront, very in your face, raising all sorts of money, running around the country with their propaganda and so on. And this has all been prompted recently by the publication in the courts. The Federal Court of Australia has published a negative or an adverse or a finding or a determination against the AVN. What's the overview of this whole process? Why did the AVN launch this legal action in the first place?
Well, this was the last of a very long line of legal actions launched by the AVN. All bar one have been unsuccessful, and the poor gullible mugs out there who contribute can only blame themselves for wasting their money responding to these appeals. Their cases are usually much the same, and they're not the only ones that do it, of course. But usually it's a challenge to vaccine mandates issued by the state governments. And this latest one was a bit unusual. They were objecting to the registration of COVID vaccines at all, claiming that that the Commonwealth Health Officer and the TGA should not have authorised these vaccines. Now, it was silly to start with, and interestingly, and this is where you need to call on a lawyer, it came down in the federal court as to whether the AVN had standing to even bring the case. Yeah. And yesterday's decision was, no, they don't. So they never even got to argue their case as to whether the vaccines had been, properly authorised and so on. And I think, reading between the lines, I think lawyers and courts everywhere regard the AVN as a bunch of rat bags, and let's not take them too seriously.
And can I deduce from this, rightly or wrongly, that it's quite possible that the AVN are not getting the best of legal advice if they proceed with these methods?
Well, that's probably more for lawyers and the Law Society to say, but I am surprised that that the AVN and similar organisations keep running the same cases. They keep running the same thing and they keep losing. Now, if I was a solicitor giving advice to someone who just walked in the door, I would say, well, your chances of success in this case are incredibly small and you're going to waste your money, but I'll take your money. I've heard lawyers say that. But I am a little surprised as to why they keep trying. Another way of looking at it, of course, is it's a bit of a fundraiser and an attention getter. So,
possibly so. But these proceedings, they're not a small thing and they're not cheap.
No, that's right. I mean, I'd love to see their bill. And it's strangely enough, when the court then considers the award of costs, we will have some idea as to how much it's cost each party. Now, for the Commonwealth, there was a bracket of barristers and legal advice, so I would think this cost the taxpayer well north of $100,000.
It's interesting because I'm just glancing through the what was being published by the court here. And in one paragraph, it says, in the absence of agreement on costs, Section B, the respondent is to file and serve written submissions as to the costs within 7 days of receipt of the submissions on costs referred to in the subparagraph A below. Lots of legal talk there. But one wonders why, what's the expression, if you keep doing the same thing with the same results, why would you expect a different result?
I think that's the definition of insanity.
Maybe so. Look, folks, I will link directly to the PDF, and this PDF is direct from the Federal Court of Australia. It's not very long. It's only less than really it's less than 3 pages, but it's certainly yet another blow against the AVN. But I guess in one sense the AVN are the classic unsinkable rubber duck, aren't they?
They are indeed. I mean, the AVN's been around for 30 years or so, founded by a couple of chiropractors, strangely enough, even though other people claim the credit. For the first 10 years or so, first 20 years, quite successful. And then in response to their appalling mistreatment of grieving families and so on, people like myself and skeptical organisations started to take notice. And there's now that permanent public warning issued by the Healthcare Complaints Commission against them, which is sort of, they're still floating as a rubber duck, but probably just as relevant to the world.
Yeah. and they also float around in their vaxxed bus, of course, which we've spoken about on the Skeptic Zone before. This is the big black bus. When they can, they tour the country and videos people who come along. Yeah.
It's all terribly sad that people can waste their talents and money on such activities, but that's the price we pay for living in a democracy.
I guess so. Well, we'll keep an eye on this situation. Again, folks, I will link directly to this court finding. It's very quick to read, and you might find that very interesting no matter where you're listening to us from around the world. We'll keep you up to date, listeners, on what eventuates with this case. But for now, Ken McLeod, thanks very much.
Okay, goodbye all. See ya.
Hi, this is Dr. Pamela Gay from Astronomy Cast. Each week, Fraser Kane and I take our listeners on a fact-based journey through the cosmos. With our weekly podcast, we explain not just what we know, but how we know what we know about this universe that we share. Check us out at astronomycast.com and look for us in iTunes, Google Play, and wherever you download podcasts. See you online.
Today is the 31st of March 2022. I'm downtown Sydney once again because I heard that, as reported on the Skeptic Zone about a month ago, nurses and midwives once again feel compelled to come to the streets to protest against their conditions or what they see as a lack of action or so forth. I'm here in Martin Place, which is in the heart of the city, and the protest was up in Macquarie Street where the Parliament is. People in uniform with badges and so on, and their main concern once again, the number of caregivers to patients. You can hear them all, and there's a small group of nurses coming my way. Could I interview you for a second for a podcast I'm doing? It's called The Skeptic Zone. It's Science and Reason podcast, where it support scientific-based medicine and things like that. And now I was here a month ago, and I was interviewing some of the nurses at the... put on the mask, always a good idea. Sends a good message. Now, if you wouldn't mind telling me what brought you back to the streets?
Ratios, safe nursing. We're understaffed or overwhelmed, and it's going to lead to accidents or mistakes and potentially loss of lives.
It's pretty dramatic. I thought a month ago it was dramatic to have nurses come out and, make these strong points. And for those of my listeners who may not quite get the concept of ratios exactly, what does that mean?
So you will have one nurse to, say, 6 patients. What we want is, in general wards, one nurse to 4 patients. In ED, we want one nurse to 3 patients.
Right.
At the moment, that's not happening.
And what do you think it is? Is it the political inaction, or is it people just don't get it?
Definitely political inaction. Victoria, South Australia has just brought it in, and Queensland all have ratios. Victoria's had ratios for the last 2 decades. So it's...
Well, it must be, you must feel very strongly about it, all of you here with me at the moment, to come out on the streets and take this action, which is, I think it's very unusual for nurses. Have you ever taken part in anything like this before? Were you here a month ago?
Yes, I was here a month ago. I think it's definitely unusual for New South Wales for strikes for nurses, but it happened in Victoria in the 1980s, and that's when they saw mandated ratios, and I think it's definitely necessary.
Right. And you're here for the same reason, I take it?
Yeah. I think we're just asking for the bare minimum, the safety of our patients. It benefits everybody. It's a lot of evidence-based, a lot of evidence in saying it saves money, it improves patient outcomes, it allows us to identify any issues faster, it gives patients a better experience, and it just keeps us sane. And it makes no sense to me how this couldn't just be it's the bare minimum. We're not asking for help, we're just asking for the bare minimum.
I think you all make very excellent points. Thank you so much for sparing a little bit of time. Have a listen to the show. It comes out every weekend, and you'll be able to hear yourselves.
Awesome, thank you.
Thank you. So there you go. And as I stand here, there are streams and streams of nurses with placards and their blue scrubs. And it takes a lot. I think it takes a lot for these people to come out and take this sort of action because their interest is caring for people. And so I think you can understand some of their passion and concern. So from Martin Place in Sydney with this follow-up report from our story from last month, this is Richard Saunders.
Hallo aan alle Nederlandse luisteraars. Op dit moment bent u aan het luisteren naar de Skeptic Zone voor wetenschap en kritisch nadenken. Voor meer informatie ga naar www.skepticzone.tv.
And now, a reading from the Book of Tim with Tim Mendham.
Hi, my name's Tim Mendham. I'm Executive Officer of Australian Skeptics Inc. and editor of our quarterly magazine, The Skeptic. And I'm here today to read from one of our older issues of the magazine on an article called The Call of the Quack, which is part 2. This article appeared in the September 2013 issue of the magazine, which was volume 33, number 4, and you can download the whole issue of the magazine for free from our website, skeptics.com.au. Now, last time I was speaking about the issue of quack and what quackery is, and we're looking at the ancient medicine as practiced in Greece. Now we're looking at taking it one step further and looking at quackery in the Roman days. Traditional Roman medicine was initially an amateur activity using simple home remedies based on easily available ingredients such as wool, eggs, and the humble but miraculous cabbage. Cato the Elder wrote in his treatise on agriculture, "For those who are troubled by colic, cabbage should be steeped in water. Now as to patients for whom urination is painful or dribbling, take cabbage. Put in boiling water, boil briefly till half cooked. If any sore or cancer develops in the breasts, apply ground cabbage. In case of dislocation, ferment with hot water twice a day and apply ground cabbage. It will soon cure it." Cabbage as the cure-all. The Romans were highly superstitious people and had a fondness for cabbage. For example, the Roman Senate only sat on auspicious days. In around 78 AD, Pliny the Elder wrote in his Natural History, "I find that a bad cold in the head clears up if the sufferer kisses a mule on the nose. Some people keep a weasel's heart in a small silver container for swollen glands." Gee, there's similar things today too. Anyway, the number 3 was regarded as a lucky number. An anonymous Roman inscription reads, "To Julian, who was spitting up blood and had been despaired of by all men, the god revealed that he should go and from the threefold altar take the seeds of a pine cone and eat them with honey for 3 days. And he was saved and went and publicly offered thanks before the people." Later Roman culture was greatly influenced by the ancient Greeks in many things, including philosophy, literature, art, science and medicine. Galen of Pergamon, from 129 to 200 AD, or CE as we now call it, was a leading surgeon, physician and philosopher of Greek origin. In 162 CE, he established a large and successful practice in Rome, where he attended the Emperor Marcus Aurelius. Among his voluminous works was a short essay entitled "That the Best Physician is Also a Philosopher," where he urged physicians to emulate Hippocrates and to embrace logic and rationality. What reason then remains why the doctor who practices the art in a manner worthy of Hippocrates should not be a philosopher? For since, in order to discover the nature of the body and the distinctions between diseases and the indications for remedies, he must exercise his mind in rational thought. And since, so that he may persevere laboriously in the practice of these things, he must despise riches and exercise temperance, he must already possess all the parts of philosophy, the logical, the scientific, and the ethical. Consistent with this approach, Galen saw the bodies of living things and their various parts as designed and operated by a craftsman-like nature with a purpose in mind. Thus, an important key to anatomical and physiological knowledge is an understanding of nature's purposes. This form of intelligent design has been described as a teleological view of biology by modern reviewers of Galen's writings. Galen held that nature rules the body from 3 anatomical centres. Wait for it, the liver, the heart and the brain, in contrast to the Aristotelian view that all faculties are centred in the heart. Galen claimed that human physiology can be explained by the principal activities of nature, which are genesis, growth and nutrition. Like Hippocrates, Galen believed in the need for the 4 humours to be in balance. He thought that the human body had 3 physiological spheres, the nutritive, the vital and the logical. According to Galen, stomach cooks food to what was called chyle and sends it to the liver. The liver adds natural spirit and sends it to other organs and the heart. The heart adds vital spirit and sends it to the brain. The brain adds what was called pneuma, that's P-N-E-U-M-A, and sends to the body through nerves. Such views were the likely origin of the modern naturopathic belief in vitalism that persists today. Naturopathy posits that a special energy called vital energy or vital force guides bodily processes such as metabolism, reproduction, growth and adaptation. Such energies and forces are unknown to modern science. For religious reasons, there was little or no dissection of human corpses in ancient Rome. Nevertheless, Galen believed in the supreme importance of anatomy, so he regularly performed dissections on animals. Although he was conscious of the limitations of extrapolating from animals to humans, he did express some erroneous views about human anatomy, such as the following description in his work on the usefulness of parts of the body, in which he says, "All the parts, then, that men have, women have too, the difference between them lying in only one thing, which must be kept in mind throughout the discussion, namely, that in women the parts are within the body, whereas in men they are outside, in the region called the perineum. Consider first whichever ones you please. Turn outward the woman's, turn inward, so to speak, and fold double the man's, and you will find them the same in both in every respect." Women were treated by male physicians, and the gynecological treatises of the Hippocratic corpus were almost certainly written by and for men. Part of the deficiency of observational evidence stems from the failure of male medical writers to speak to women about their illnesses. So what's new? Women were traditionally presented as being incapable of knowing what was wrong with them, or telling a doctor if they did know. Galen's teleological view of biology also appears to have influenced his attitude towards women, when he says, "So too the woman is less perfect than the man in respect to the generative parts. For the parts were formed within her when she was still a fetus, but could not, because of the defect in the heart, emerge and project on the outside. And this, though making the animal itself that was being formed less perfect than one that is complete in all respects, provided no small advantage for the race, for their needs must be a female. Indeed, you ought not to think that our Creator would purposely make half the whole race imperfect and, as it were, mutilated, unless there was to be some great advantage in such a mutilation." These biased attitudes impacted wider Greek and Roman society. For example, it was believed, on false medical grounds, that a man's seed was most potent when he was about 30 years of age, and a woman's body best suited for childbirth when she was still a teenager. The medical theories of ancient Greece and Rome formed the foundation of Western medicine for centuries, even if they were eventually rejected. The main reasons for this rejection were the development of empirical scientific methods after the Renaissance, coupled with advances such as the invention of the microscope and the germ theory of infectious disease. While there were observations of individual patients, there is no evidence of any organised medical experiments being conducted in ancient Greece and Rome, let alone clinical trials. In some ways, the Greek philosophical traditions of logic and rationality held back a more empirical scientific approach to medicine. Instead of conducting practical experiments on illnesses, ancient Greek and Roman physicians became diverted into a search for the underlying purposes of diseases, a relatively fruitless search for meaning rather than for empirical evidence. This mystical and unscientific approach is one of the hallmarks of quackery today. And that's part 2 of an article called The Call of the Quack by Tim Harding, published in the Skeptic magazine, September 2013, volume 33, number 3, which you can download the whole issue, not just that article, for free on our website, skeptics.com.au.
Be Reasonable is the interview show from the Merseyside Skeptic Society, where each month I speak to someone about their fringe beliefs. Over the years I've spoken to psychics, UFO believers, moon landing deniers, flat earthers, hollow earthers and all manner of unusual conspiracy theorists. But I've also talked to AIDS denialists, white supremacists, gay conversion therapists. I even interviewed Jim Humble, the inventor of Miracle Mineral Supplement, a form of industrial bleach that he and his followers use to treat cancer and HIV. This isn't a debate show, and my aim isn't to win an argument. But when we listen to how people promote and justify the ideas that we disagree with, even the dangerous ones, I think we become much more effective at countering those ideas. If that sounds like something you'd be interested in, look for Be Reasonable on Apple Podcasts and everywhere else that podcasts live.
It's time once again to dive into those pages at Trove at trove.nla.gov.au, the online resource for digitised newspapers and gazettes and magazines and periodicals and journals and an amazing array of publications free for you to trawl, to investigate, to examine. And in keeping with our paranormal theme, this time we're going to look at various mentions of Australian skeptics and such like at work as represented in the pages of Australian publications. And when I say of such, I mean things like James Randi. So we begin with a little snippet here from the Australian Jewish News. The Australian Jewish News. From 1994, published on the 24th of June. And it's just a little segment, a little patch here on the page. Television. Spoonbender Uri Geller is featured in Secrets of the Psychics on SBS. About Us. June 29, 8:30 p.m. Professional magician and skeptic James Randi tests the claims of people like Geller who claim to have paranormal powers. Now, I imagine that made a mention in the Jewish news because Geller was originally from Israel. And that documentary, by the way, Secrets of the Psychics, I'm pretty sure that's available on YouTube, and it's worth having a look. Secrets of the Psychics. It's the one where Randi travels to Russia. Russia being in the news at the moment for all the wrong reasons. But anyway, in the early 1990s, James Randi traveled to Russia to test various psychics and healers. And that's a fascinating adventure and one worth your time to watch. Now here's another report from the year 1993 on the 23rd of June as published in the Canberra Times. And this is by Peter Davis. A solid guarantee of sense and sensibility. 500 mostly true believers in skepticism from around Australia packed the Melbourne University Lecture Theatre last weekend to witness an amusing yet serious scientific and anecdotal avalanche against faith healers, homeopaths, advocates of Armageddon, believers in facilitated communication, and cult leaders. You will see and hear the most amazing things that are almost guaranteed to make you sensible again, was the promise made by the convention organisers. The skeptics' slogan is, quote, "Seek the evidence," end quote, and their mission is to do to the paranormal what German philosopher Friedrich Hegel attempted to do to Karl Marx, to, quote, "seek the rational kernel in the mystical shell," end quote. Opening the convention, Barry Jones, MHR, reminded the audience that over 2,000 years ago there was a school of academic skepticism. "However, I'm not a true believer," confessed Jones, who drew upon the future of Sisyphus to define his own branch of skepticism. Sisyphus was ordained to spend the rest of his years pushing a boulder up a mountain, knowing full well that it would crash to the bottom again. "We should indeed imagine Sisyphus happy," said Jones, paraphrasing the French writer Albert Camus. Happiness and skepticism became the issue of the great debate, titled "Skepticism Sucks," during which two skeptics took on two skeptics, pretending to be non-skeptics, to discuss whether or not the term "a happy skeptic" is, as is commonly believed, an oxymoron. The pretending non-skeptics were declared the winners. A man who claims tremendous life joy from being a skeptic is Professor Ian Plimer, head of Earth Sciences at Melbourne University and self-confessed creationism buster. The charismatic Professor Plimer cleverly demonstrated how anyone can be fooled into believing the hot air espoused by preachers of Armageddon. The main draw card of the convention was James Randi, the white-beard American magician who founded the highly regarded Committee for the Scientific Investigation of Claims of the Paranormal. Randi wanders the world media circuit to expose the fraudulent activities of faith healers, charismatic preachers, and spoonbenders. His trademark is a $10,000 offer to anyone who can demonstrate a psychic or supernatural event. Since he took to the world stage, Randi has rejected every one of the more 600 claims to the prize. There were no claims during the Australian convention. "We're not saying we're right. We're simply offering an alternative point of view," says Randi, who has published 11 books and who became the first magician to receive the prestigious $227,000 Genius Award from the MacArthur Foundation. If skeptics are happy, the lawyers must be ecstatic. Skepticism is big business for the legal profession. James Randi has recently emerged from a defamation case where he was being sued for $39 million for daring to expose fraudulent claims. The judge found for the plaintiff but awarded zero compensation on all four counts. Because he won, the plaintiff cannot appeal. Randi now faces a $15 million lawsuit by Israeli spoonbender Uri Geller, who is upset by Randi's claim that he, Geller, uses simple sleight-of-hand magic, not psychic power, to bend spoons. Meanwhile, Professor Plimer is being sued by, quotes, Dr. end quotes, Alan Roberts, winner of the 1992 Australian Skeptics Bent Spoon Award, for his questioning of Roberts' claims regarding the discovery of Noah's Ark in a Mount Ararat region of Turkey. At the same time, Professor Plimer is suing Roberts for plagiarism of published material. Whilst there was much laughter at the convention, mostly at the expense of faith healers and psychics, many sober and salient points were made. James Randi was clearly angry when outlining his experience with, quote, facilitated communication, end quote, where mentally disabled children use keyboard to type out messages under the guidance of an adult or facilitator. He is in no doubt that the technique is simple manipulation and that it is the families who suffer because they truly believe their children are communicating of their own volition. Randi saved the best for last when he screened a video of his demonstration on the American Tonight Live show of the Filipino faith healing techniques. We saw a relaxed Randi pull endless bloodied entrails from the unopened stomach of a willing and relaxed participant.
"It's all sleight of hand,"
Randi assured the convention.
"There would be many people alive today if they hadn't relied on such charlatans."
Ignorance is also of great concern to Dr. Stephen Basser, a Melbourne medical practitioner who now works in hospital administration. In his paper called Therapeutics Goods Act, License to Kill, Dr. Basser outlined how the Act creates two categories: registered goods and listed goods.
Registered goods require an evaluation of their quality and safety before they are released to the public. Listed goods require no such testing.
Dr. Basser claims that herbal remedies are mostly classed as listed goods.
Why is it,
he asks,
that prescription drugs need to be thoroughly evaluated for their impact on humans, but herbal drugs, which are supposed to have the same effect, evade testing simply because they carry the label of natural?
One of the most disturbing talks at the convention was given by Tony and Joan McLeod. They outlined the mind control techniques used by various cults to recruit members from the ever-increasing ranks of vulnerable and the gullible. After spending many months and many thousands of dollars rescuing and deprogramming their son from the clutches of the Church of Scientology, the McClellans found an organization called Cult Aware. While the convention demonstrated that skeptics can indeed enjoy life, it also demonstrated that they need to do something about their gender balance. There were many female skeptics in the audience, but Joan McLeod was the only female out of 11 speakers, and she shared the platform with her husband. Many skeptics are down on the media because they claim that editors and producers are all too willing to give time and space to charlatans simply because people who indulge in the paranormal make good copy. Perhaps to prove the point, the 1993 Bent Spoon Award went to the Steve Vizard and the Tonight Live show on Channel 7. The citation reads, quote, "for perpetuating and perpetrating ignorance on all and sundry who watch the show throughout Australia." And finally, we come to the Bulletin from Australia, dated the 10th of April, 1984. In a piece by Philip Adams, who is one of the co-founders of Australian Skeptics all those years ago. Once again, the best of the bent spoons. There are so many awards around, it's almost impossible not to win them. It's only with the greatest effort that I've managed to avoid cluttering the mantelpiece with Logies, Oscars, Emmys, Archibalds, and Nobles, because I'm really holding out for the big one, the most prestigious award of the lot. Yes, the bent spoon of the Australian Skeptics. Pennants will note that I use prestigious in its correct sense. You see, the word has absolutely nothing to do with status. It means practicing tricks, juggling, or cheating. It derives from prestidigitation, which has to do with sleight of hand and legerdemain. Bulletin readers may recall that the original bent spoon was in honour of Uri Geller, sworn enemy of cutlery. Anyone foolish enough to lend him a piece of Rod or Grosvenor, or, heaven forbid, their Christophe, which is a French line of silverware, I think, would have them tied in knots or entirely depronged. The phenomenon of psychic metal bending rampaged through the scientific laboratories of the UK and the US as a succession of gullible scientists, by endorsing Uri's paranormal skills, made fools of themselves. The simple fact was that Geller, who was a conjurer, who, in due course, was unmasked by another conjurer, the devastating debunker James Randi. Forced to scuttle from the limelight, Geller was seen selling health foods in a counter-culture noshery in New York. More recently, he's been living in a preposterous mansion provided for him by the wife of a South American president who, despite detailed evidence of chicanery, chooses to believe that Uri is God. So, we Australian skeptics decided to honour Geller's contribution to gullibility, with annual awards for paranormal nonsense in a number of hotly contested categories. By tradition, our judge is 3AW's Darren Hinch, and this page carries the glad tidings to the four corners of the continent. Now, I'll just quickly say here that I wasn't aware that in the early days that Darren Hinch, who was a famous radio personality, TV personality, and later senator, was involved in judging the Australian Skeptics Spence Boone Award all those years ago. Currently, it's decided by a more or less a polling of various skeptical committees around the country. We read on. In the open psychic section, the nominees were Kevin Arnett, who once again appeared on the Don Lane Show with a panel of psychics to predict the outcome of the Melbourne Cup. As in previous years, the predictions were pathetic. Not one of the psychics' first choices so much ran a place. When pressed for an explanation, Arnett lamented, "After all, they're only human beings." 2. Tom Wards, who on Radio 3GL on Melbourne Cup Day complained that Arnett had not invited him to join the psychic panel on the Don Lane Show. Not content with naming one or two horses as winners, clairvoyant Wards gave a list of 5. Sadly, not one of them so much as ran a place. 3. Gary Wiseman, astrologer, for explaining in People, that's People magazine, June 1983, that his prediction that Malcolm Fraser would step down due to flagging health came true indirectly. Malcolm Fraser, by the way, was Prime Minister who stepped down because he lost the election. 4. Dennis Hassel, for allowing a Melbourne audience to convince itself that his face was changing, that an aura was appearing around him, and that one arm was disappearing, all by simple lighting effects. We also liked the quote, "If you take away spiritual happenings from the Bible, you are only left with rape, murder, and genealogical tables." Next, there's the Media Prize. The nominees were 1. Sunday Times, for reporting January 1, 1983, that a Western Australian couple contacted Manu of the planet Tau Ceti telepathically every day. 2. Martin Collins of The Australian, which is a newspaper, for stating, April 30th, 1983, that negative ion generators prevented migraines, colds, hay fever, hangovers, and admitting that an appalling grasp upon matters scientific prevents your correspondent providing a proper technical rundown of the machine. 3. New Idea, for an article on September 3, 1983, claiming that we all have ESP and can develop it by some simple exercises. 4. The Sydney Sun, for publishing a 20-question psychic quotient test on September the 1st, 1983. 5. The Sydney Daily Mirror, for front-page headline screaming, "Believe it or not, Sydney Airport tracks UFOs." When the Department of Aviation later reported that the blip was found to be the result of interference between two radar systems, hardly a squeak was heard from the press. 6. The Australasian Post, for continuing to give acres to the catastrophic predictions from Wards. For example, on June 23, 1982, Wards announced that the federal election would be held in the next 8 weeks. It wasn't. And that Neville Wran would enter federal parliament. Also that Joh Bjelke-Petersen would retire and that Labour would win in Queensland. Incredibly, Ward's 1983 predictions were even worse. On January 6th, his third eye foresaw spy scandals bringing down the British government, Alice Springs hit by food poisoning, and a ship sinking near Hobart, and snow in Melbourne in June. 7. People magazine for publishing an even greater quantity of psychic nonsense. The indefatigable John Pinckney reported that people in Queensland and Perth were telepathically communicating with UFOs, and that a Perth schoolboy had fought ugly aliens from a huge green and white cone. Pinckney told how a Melbourne film producer's house was hit by mysterious fires until exorcist Kerry Culkins removed a mask of a New Guinea fire god. And in reporting that holy water could cure oral herpes, Pinckney suggested that homosexuals may have belonged to the opposite sex in a previous life. Government involvement in the paranormal scored 2 nominations. 1. Joe Bjelke-Petersen for his continued support of cancer therapist Milan Brajc. Following the conviction in Los Angeles of the dud Czech, and Czech is spelled C-Z-E-C-H, on 12 counts of dangerous medical malpractice and fraud, Joe described the decision as a pity. 2. Telecom Australia for running 2 dial-a-horoscope recorded information services listed along with legitimate services for news, weather and boating safety. Australian skeptics wonder whether telecom research laboratories, who maintain the precision of the time service, also guarantee the accuracy of the astrological predictions. The October 1983 issue of Telecom Staff magazine introduced us to their astrologer, Pamela Rowe, explaining that she has, quote, gained a diploma in cosmobiology in 1977, end quote. The final category concerns science. We are all proud to list 3 outstanding nominees. 1. Stan Deyo, a self-styled research physicist. Deyo claims he had discovered UFO propulsion by anti-gravity, non-uniform internal shifts, and anti-vector currents. When pressed for further information, Deyo told us that such discoveries were concealed by a government conspiracy. 2. The Maharishi Mahesh Yogi, ex-spiritual advisor to the Beatles. The Maharishi has recently revealed his, quote, technology of the unified field, end quote, based on bogus quantum physics. The Maharishi talks of, quote, the continuous effervescence of topological fluctuations, end quote, and hands out the most wondrous fool-looking scientific equations. In recent double-page advertisements in newspapers throughout the world, the Maharishi announced that his followers would, through meditation, prevent the Third World War. 3. Barry Setterfield, amateur astronomer turned creationist, recently contrived a mathematical curve, allegedly based on the speed of light, which showed that the universe began in the year 4040 BC, coincident with biblical chronology. His findings were published in a long and detailed scientific paper. All in all, rich pickings. And now to the report from our judge, Mr. Hinch.
This year's finals for the bent spoon show a shortage of spoon benders, water-powered car inventors, haunted council officers, and the Doris Stokes trademark of I see a Ron, no, a Ray, no, a Roy. Is your name Reg? Yes, I see you. There is no shortage of UFO candidates, and I'm still perplexed why the aliens always snatch and race off in their close encounter ships with corn farmers from Iowa, but never with an Einstein or McFarlane brunette. I was going to say that this year's list is disappointing, but then maybe, just maybe, people are becoming a little less gullible. There has been no drop-off in the psychic/religious mumbo-jumbo, the Maharishi's mishmash of equations about utopia, and the unified field keeps pouring forth. I have given him the prize in the academic section. In the government section, Premier Bjelke-Petersen rates another mention for this year for his continued support of cancer quack Brajc, even after Brajc's conviction on 12 charges in Los Angeles. However, Telecom wins it with Dial a Horoscope. In the media, it is always a close call between Pinckney and Ward's Professional Future Predictor, Tats Numbers Picker, Disaster Spotter, etc. Our overall winner, though, is Hassel. He can dematerialize himself so that people can see right through him. It is a pity that more people can't.
Amen to that. And that was a roundup of the Bent Spoon Award from the year 1984, written by Philip Adams. So there we go, some of the references to the activities here in Australia over the years with the convention, James Randi, and of course the Bent Spoon Award. And don't forget that Trove, the treasure trove that is Trove, is open to you. The door is open. All you need to do is go to trove.nla.gov.au and type in your search criteria, and you'll never know what you might find. Thank you for listening to the Skeptic Zone podcast this week, and thank you as ever, as always, to my wonderful listeners who support the Skeptic Zone at skepticzone.tv via Patreon or PayPal with your monthly contributions, and occasionally the people who simply chip in. There's an option there in the PayPal segment or section where you can chip in. And if you've chipped in recently, keep an eye on the post. Something's coming your way. As well as my gratitude, my deep gratitude, because it's because of all you people that the show can keep going. Coming up on next week's show, the Trove segment looks like we've got astrology. Once more, looking at astrology lined up in the Trove segment, and the Book of Tim, keeping with the astrology theme, looks at astrology and astronomy. And speaking of Trove, I've covered so many skeptical topics on Trove. I'm wondering what to cover next. If you care to make a comment on the Facebook posting of this week's episode, so go to skepticzone.tv, and at the top you'll see the Facebook link. And once you're on Facebook, the Skeptic Zone Facebook page, you can like that podcast and then you can comment. So maybe on the comments for episode number 704, you can maybe tell me what you'd like me to look up in the Trove archives and talk about. Maybe it's something we've done before. UFOs are always very popular, alternative medicine, psychics, clairvoyance, tarot, Ouija boards, monsters, you name it. Or maybe you've got an idea. Maybe you have an idea for a new adventure for the skeptical fairy godmother angel from the internet, who appears in a puff of smoke to save the day occasionally. I think she needs some new adventures. And before I go, a big congratulations to our dear friend Susan Gerbic from Guerrilla Skepticism on Wikipedia for just celebrating her 100th online weekly quiz. Now, why that's important is that she began doing these quizzes during the pandemic when everybody needed a pick-up, a lift-up, something. And it's been a weekly tradition now for 100 weeks with many people joining in, and it's a big part of their week, and mine too. I often attend the weekly trivia sessions and have a wonderful time, catch up with friends, and it's all thanks to Susan Gerbic. So Susan, wonderful job, and congratulations. But for this week, this is Richard Saunders signing off from the Skeptic Zone studios here in Sydney, Australia. You've been listening to the Skeptic Zone podcast. Please visit our website at www.skepticzone.tv for show notes, contacts, and to access the back catalogue of episodes going back to 2008. You can follow the Skeptic Zone podcast on Twitter @Skeptic Zone, visit our Facebook page, or leave a review on iTunes. You can also support the Skeptic Zone via Patreon or PayPal. The Skeptic Zone podcast is an independent production. The views and opinions expressed on the Skeptic Zone are not necessarily those of Australian skeptics or any other skeptical organisation. I'm now with the Skeptic Zone cats, Henrietta and Maud, who are very skeptical because they think it's time for dinner. Do you want some dinner? You want some dinner? What's that? What? Who wants some dinner? You have to wait another hour before dinner. You don't agree? Do you want to take it up at the board meeting? I see.